Before we begin, we want to take a moment to thank our sponsors at Audible. Now that the weather's getting nicer, I'm back to reading and listening to books in the park. And with Audible, it's never been easier. Every month, I get 1 credit to pick any title, plus 2 Audible originals from a monthly selection. In addition, I get access to news digests from the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post. If you go to audibletrial.com/YMO podcast, you'll get 2 free audiobooks on us. Download thousands of titles offline anytime, anywhere. Having trouble deciding what to pick? Audible lets you keep your credits for up to a year. Find your summer read and support your favorite National Film Registry podcast. Once again, that's audibletrial.com/YMO podcast. Thank you for your support.
And now, on with the show.
Gentlemen, I want to know, since you guys are both collectors, I want to know something that you've worked hard on to hunt down, but in the end, after all of that effort, it just wasn't worth it.
I always go back to, because I'm a Blu-ray collector, that about, 7-8 years ago, when I was trying to get all the John Carpenter movies on Blu-ray, and that wasn't possible at the time. There were still empty slots in the collection there. Twilight Time had Christine, but it was out of print, so you could only get it on secondary market, aka eBay or Amazon. And the price was pretty hefty, about $80, and that was annoying. Didn't know if it was ever going to come out again, if whatnot. So one year for my birthday, I said, fuck it, I'm going to buy Christine, $80 on eBay. Boom, great. Now I have Christine, one less John Carpenter movie to have. And then a year later, Universal puts it out on Blu-ray. And then, I don't know, about 2 years ago, they put it out on 4K Blu-ray. So, I felt like a big old fucking idiot doing that. So I try to stay away from the secondary market with these goddamn Blu-rays at this point, because you never know. Or I should say, I know, because the second I buy them, they will become available.
Mine actually is something that happened with you, Kyle. This is a story you and I share.
Oh my God, really?
Yes,
There's not a whole lot.
Correct. So, we did hang out a lot once upon a time.
I just mean in terms of like collecting and something.
Yeah.
So I'm curious what this comes to.
So I sometimes get fixated on weird movies that are too strange to live. And one thing I desperately wanted that all of my local stores sold out of was that there was a movie a couple years ago called Nutcracker in the Four Realms. It's very weird. It's on Disney Plus. I hope folks check it out. And I started collecting merch from this unsuccessful Blockbuster. And the one thing I desperately wanted was they had produced a full-size Nutcracker, like a massive Nutcracker from Nutcracker in the Four Realms. And I desperately wanted it. And Kyle, you and I were we were in Manhattan one day for I don't remember the reason, but you and I were just bumming around. I don't remember. And a friend of ours, in fact, past guest of the show, Jeremy Swanton, texts me to tell me that he spotted one of these Nutcrackers in the Times Square Disney store, which we were nowhere near.
Oh man, I thought this was FAO Schwartz.
No. FAO Schwartz didn't exist then. This is that mid period. So you and I jump on a train and like gun it up to the Disney store so I can rush into the store, because I'm like, God, I have to get to it. And we get there. We finally get over there, and you turned around and pointed out, like, I don't know why I was rushing, because it's not like somebody was going to snap it up. But I grabbed it, and now I had this massive box to carry around, because this is a tall thing. This is like up to my knee almost. I think we met up with people for dinner that night, and I just like put it on the table, and people were confused. Long story short, all of this questing and all of this mania for this Nutcracker, it currently sits under my desk. I have nowhere to put it. It's taking up a lot of space, and there's absolutely no reason for me to have this. So, kind of just sitting here staring at me, laughing at me. Nutcracker in the Four Realms, full-size
Not
Nutcracker.
Cracking any nuts.
Nope. Has not cracked a single nut.
That's a shame.
Yep. Every year since 1989, the Library of Congress has selected 25 films to add to the National Film Registry. The criteria? The films must be culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant.
Each week on You're Missing Out, we take a look at one of these films to try and get to the heart of why they were selected and why they still matter.
This week, our Houston historian returns to the show. David Bluvband is here for 1948's The Treasure of the Sierra Madre.
Our guest today is an actor, writer, and comedian you know from The Chris Gethard Show and The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. He's returning to our show once again. David Bluvband is joining us to talk about The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. David, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, guys. I'm excited to talk about Treasure of the Sierra Madre.
We're excited to talk about it with you, and as always, I'm always excited to talk about John Huston with another John Huston superfan, so welcome back, David.
And I'm excited because this is one of the only episodes, as I learned from Maltese Falcon, where I don't have to do anything. This is normally on our show. I can, I'm kind of leading the conversation. I have to do a ton of research, but revisiting our fan favorite Maltese Falcon episode, I did realize that between you and Tom's passions for Huston and film noir, I truly could get up and walk away, and it's fine. I don't have to. It's a great thing to know I don't have to sit here and prep heavily and learn, like, I don't know, the biography of Harold Lloyd or something. I know we're rocking and rolling. So thank you for joining us. You were on last season for the Maltese Falcon, which is great. Our listeners really enjoyed that one. And I remember you saying on that episode that your favorite Bogart performance was The Treasure of the Sierra Madre.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Hard to argue with that not being the number one choice for the fella. It's unbelievable performance.
And once I knew we were doing season 2, I forget what exactly it was. You put out some kind of tweet about going on podcasts or something, and you were one of the first people that we reached out to about season 2 when I responded to your tweet saying, "You want to talk to Sierra Madre?" Which is a tweet I sent, by the way, from the bar at the Times Square Margaritaville. I don't know why I remember that specifically, but there was just something about that entire atmosphere that felt very strange. But and you said yes. I'm so glad you're back. How have you been? I should start with that. How has?
I've been good. I've been okay. As far as one can say in these times. But it's mostly been. My time has mostly been dedicated to consuming all sorts of media and working, and then taking care of my dog, and that's really it. I live a pretty hermetic life at the moment. So I'm just constantly consuming movies, and when you asked me to if I wanted to talk about this movie, I jumped at the chance because I do love this film. It's one of my top 100. It's up there for me, and it's so good, and there's so many different things I like about it. And it has elements of things I like in every movie.
So without further ado, because I want to make sure we can get fully into this, because I know everybody's got a lot to say on this one. Before we talk about what we like about the film, let's talk about why the registry picked it. Here's what the National Film Registry had to say. John Huston wrote and directed this intense character study of gold fever among an unlikely trio of prospectors, Humphrey Bogart, Tim Holt, and the director's father, Walter Huston. Bogart is outstanding as the pathetic bully Fred C. Dobbs, a tragic hero brought down precisely by his flaws. Walter Huston won an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor as a giddy, grizzled old-timer. Roger Ebert noted the film's pitiless, stark realism that gives the film its honesty and truth. So that is what the National Film Registry had to say. The only other thing I wanted to note right off the bat is I was watching the documentary they included on the old Warner DVD. Because you remember how Warner used to pack all those DVDs with special features?
Yeah.
And it was a documentary about the Treasure of the Sierra Madre and the finding the treasure. And it opens with Martin Scorsese talking about a conversation with Elia Kazan. I think it might have been in front of a class or some other film people. And Elia Kazan is going on and on complaining about the difficulties of making movies and the state of cinema today and all that, and just sounds real negative. And then Scorsese says he looked up and said, "But hey, we get to work in the same medium that made The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. Isn't that great?" And I just loved that realization. So,
Sure.
Yeah. But this is obviously another John Huston film. We should note this is, in a way, both his fourth film and also maybe his second film, because in between the Maltese Falcon and The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, he did make 2 other films. One is In This Our Life,
Okay.
and the other is Across the Pacific. In This Our Life is a novel adaptation, worth checking out for any film history buffs because it reunites Olivia de Havilland and Hattie McDaniel, and also features Betty Davis, who was the other person really in contention for Scarlett O'Hara. So you get a little taste of what Gone with the Wind might have been like otherwise. And Across the Pacific is kind of a weird, super 1940s racist movie about
Oh,
the Japanese plotting attack on America that was supposed to be Pearl
boy.
Harbor. Then they actually attacked Pearl Harbor, so they rewrote it. Long story short, Houston didn't complete either of those films because he had to join the Army's Signal Corps. So Raoul Walsh finished In This Our Life, and Vincent Sherman finished Across the Pacific. So
Okay.
Treasure of the Sierra Madre is his 4th film on his filmography, but it is the 2nd film that John Huston got to complete start to finish.
Okay.
Yeah.
So wanted to put that out there at the start, where this fits into his career and where this fits compared to the film we talked about last time. So
And
Sure.
it's, I mean, a movie he was trying to make for a long time, even before he got to Maltese, because he got to this book in 35 around
Mm.
then, and this was the time where he was writing and doing, script doctoring and all that stuff before he was had so much success as a writer that he was given Maltese Falcon, and then other people tried to make it during World War II, but then the producer was trying to like do the best they could to kind of like make sure nobody did get to it, and like, no, Houston's doing it, we're just rewriting it for him while he's away. And then he comes back from the war and makes, I mean, this is like the ultimate John Huston movie. I mean, I know people could make, arguments about what's their favorite John Huston movie, but for a guy whose whole thing is about focusing on the outcasts and the kind of the
Yeah.
degenerates of the world
Yeah.
with a loving
Yeah.
eye, even in this one, even though he's very very judgmental in the end on what Dobbs does. This is like the ultimate degenerate guys just being guys kind of story that he could have ever done, and he does it perfectly, you know?
Yeah, it does fit his sensibilities maybe more than any other film in his body of work as a director. I think cuz like John Huston isn't one of those American writer guys who's of the same like like the is a he's a contemporary of Hemingway,
Yeah, he's
and
definitely one
these
of those
like
kind of guys.
yeah, he's like one of these expat adventurer types who like actually want to live life in order to write about it. And like he joined he went to Mexico and fought in the Mexican army for like a specific period of time, which is also like very makes me think is why he related so much to the book. He probably knew guys like the characters in the book.
I mean, hell, a lot of the stuff with them and the bandits on the train in the beginning
Yeah,
is like taken straight from his experiences of riding a
right.
train through Mexico, and bandits started shooting at them.
God,
They started shooting back, and then like in the next town they saw those bandits getting executed by the army. So it's,
Jesus.
I mean,
I mean, yeah, this is also still the time of like we're not too far away from the old west. Like weirdly enough, so it's like there's still train robberies in
yeah,
like the 1920s when this story takes place. So like it's definitely one of those things I can see why he is drawn to the story. It has all those things that like you said, Tom, that he's obsessed with. He's obsessed with like character studies of these degenerate characters that like it's you absolute power corrupts absolutely, any of those types of taglines, that he's like attracted to those types of storylines as a writer director and as an actor.
yeah.
uh and I think it is like kind of a very distilled, like if you sifted through the to pan for the gold that is the pure ideas of John Huston, you'd probably get this movie.
There's definitely like he's definitely got a bit of that thing that like Peckinpah had later in his life of like looking at Mexico as like uh, a gateway to the past where things weren't as there weren't all these cities and the hypocrisy of the ruling class and all that, and just
Sure, yeah.
back to nature and all that sort of stuff. I mean,
You can live pretty cheaply too. It's like appealing. It's like to be honest, like it is really appealing as to like a young American man
yeah.
until you
What?
until you actually live there and get there. And it's not because it's obviously very beautiful, but it's also like I was thinking a lot about this movie with just how like the Dobbs character, like Humphrey Bogart's Dobbs character is like I don't know if we should to like just go straight into the in-depth analysis of the characters right
Oh,
now,
please,
or
by all means.
but like the Dobbs character feels like the ultimate ugly American,
Oh yeah.
like the like type of guy that but like he's literally like living off other tourists. Like he's come to the country. We don't know why he's there, but I assume he's like a ne'er do well who's just kind of living hand to mouth, and like he's an asshole. Like he's like from start to finish like a really terrible person, like just a bad guy.
Oh yeah.
And it reminds me a lot of like it's not unlike an ugly American that's like it's a character that feels timeless. It feels like a modern character, like the xenophobic character, the guys that you hear today on the news, like about just like people coming into like protect our borders, and then you like Americans started doing that. Like we were going into Mexico and like taking jobs away from people.
Well, it's just like look at how he acts when they get all the money. I mean, he's
Yes.
basically looking at the two men that worked with him to get all this gold, and honestly did more than him because he seemed kind of useless and had to
Yeah.
really rely on Walter Houston. He's looking at them like, you guys are going to take all my money.
Yeah, it's so funny how like useless and truly unnecessary to the whole plan Dobbs is. Like he's just the third guy in the plan because he put in the money for it. But like Tim Holt, the character of Bob Curtin is is like an honest worker. He's like he's the stand-in for the audience. He's our viewpoint for the story. And then Walter Houston's the old expert. But then like Dobbs is at every turn, everything we learn about him is just a notch of like how we're not supposed to like him. He gets trapped in the cave, and then Tim Holt has to come save him. He's like he mistrusts at every turn. He like has something negative to say about every positive turn or anything, and he can't do anything. He
No,
can't do anything.
he is 100%, like you said, the kind of guy who would talk about people, living off of, they want handouts. They don't want to work for a living, blah, blah, blah. But then you
Right,
see
right,
him living off of handouts, but also taking those handouts and
exactly.
not doing the right thing with them. He's getting a haircut and a shave. He's going to a whorehouse. He's not
Yeah.
actually he's not eating. He's just living like a degenerate asshole. And then with all the money at the end, he looks at Walter Houston and Tim Holt as these guys that are holding him back. He's gonna rob them. That they're just kind of
Yeah,
they're hangers on, where he's actually the hanger on. And
right.
you
He
know,
get he sub whether it's subconscious and like a subconscious awareness of his own insecurities, but but he knows he's the weak link in that partnership.
oh yeah, I mean,
Like he knows, and that's why he's threatened.
well, because when Houston they meet him for the first time and he's telling them about the gold's curse and everything and how it'll corrupt them,
Right.
he's very loudly like, "No, that's not going to be me. I know I'm going to make gold work for me. Gold's going to make me a good guy," and blah blah blah. Very
Yeah.
loudly, like every fucking jerk off today that thinks once they get money they'll be one of those good rich guys. Well, we're just waiting to be
Exactly.
rich, and he's not.
He sounds like every like right wing politician who and like and we get that even like when we hear that monologue from Tim Holt about like what he wants to do with his share of the money, about like growing a fruit orchard and like wanting to be like, close to, like, relating his experiences picking on the fields, and like, I saw these families and we were all together and we sang songs and it was very beautiful. And then like Humphrey Bogart's, all of Dobbs's goals are like the first things we see him do in the movie. Like, he gets, like, as soon as I'm gonna get money, I'm gonna get new threads. I'm gonna get like a shave. Like, he's literally like, I'm gonna get a shave and a haircut. He's like, they're all frivolous. He's like wasting them. He's like gonna immediately waste his shares.
And it's like, I think there's a subtle thing going on here with Tim Holt and Humphrey Bogart, in that they never really get into their backstories or anything, but you kind of get the feeling like, oh, Tim Holt's probably kind of like the younger version of Walter Houston. He's just a guy who kind of is in a bad
Mm.
spot right now, and if he just gets the right thing, he'll be okay. He'll end up at a ranch somewhere and be like the number 2 guy or whatever. But where you like casting Bogart, you get a very city feel from this guy. No matter what they don't tell us anything, but you get a sense maybe this guy got into trouble in New York City
Yeah,
or Kansas City or Detroit or something,
right.
and he
Or
had to run.
Texas or something.
Yeah.
There is. You're absolutely right. There is a very real sense of danger with Bogart. Like, Tim Holt is probably down on his luck, but Humphrey Bogart is fleeing from something.
Because like he feels like you would see him next to Roy Scheider in Sorcerer.
Yeah.
He's
Oh yeah. 100%. He would be in that like jungle, just trying to be like, yeah, of course, I'll drive this truck full of dynamite.
Yeah, he's hiding
If
from
it'll
the
get me out
problem.
here.
Yeah, he's a guy who can't get out of his own way. And like, by ending it
Yes.
with Holt and Houston kind of, Houston telling Holt, like, you got to just laugh at this shit because, and Tim Holt being
Right.
like, yeah, it's funny. What the hell? Like, who cares? I'll go up to Texas and find, I'll go find James Cody's wife and all that and help her out. And blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah. Why even get mad? Whereas Humphrey Bogart, even the thought of losing an inkling of that gold sets him in becoming a wide-eyed deranged maniac who can't
Oh,
handle
he's
anything.
insane. Yeah.
He feels like he would be, in a Cagney movie, which he, as one of those guys who's just gonna betray the gang to get his money, So
It's very late stages Daniel Plainview.
oh yeah,
And
definitely.
it's very I also think of there's this guy's Rayhad Jackson, that Alfred Molina's character from Boogie Nights.
Oh yeah.
It's like that's a character, like, that is like if Dobbs makes it out of Mexico rich.
Yeah.
Like, he becomes that guy.
I
Like,
mean,
he'd be like, if he becomes like successful and wealthy, he'd be like a maniac and totally insane.
he's one of the guys in the Goodfellas crew that buys a fur coat after Robin Latanza. He's not
Yeah, yeah,
he's not smart. He would become new
not
rich and
smart.
not old rich, which is again a subtle thing that feels very much in play with Houston's, I guess, clear-eyed sentimentality of like the old ways of living off the land and like the lack of civilization and all that, but without
Well, yeah.
being like
Sorry.
too in your face about it. No, yeah, but just it's like that subtle thing without ever beating you over the head with it. The way like to it, I think positively Peckinpah does it in his movies, but this is very like using the casting to get that point across without telling you.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of those rare things with like westerns. Sam Peckinpah can get like it's this movie is surprisingly dark for like a Warner Brothers studio film from 1948. Like, it's one of those things is
Yeah.
like, like, it's one of those movies that you from the 40s. It's like some of these noirs or some of these like old films, like, they'll slip through the cracks of being like, oh, this is intensely dark. And like the source, like, just from the source material, this Nightmare Alley is the same, is like just as, if not more, dark.
Oh yeah.
And it's because it's such a human story.
Yeah.
And Walter Houston's character is like a broken guy. Like, he's in his 50s or 60s or whatever, and living in flop houses in Mexico, just trying, living off the land and just trying to, like, he's living the life of a migrant worker, and he's there's clearly this, like, he's seen things that have probably broken him many times over. And he's maybe he at one point in his life he was a Dobbs type. He might be running from something too, but but maybe he's like lived through enough hardships that it softened him a little bit
Yeah, yeah,
as an almost an adverse effect of what it usually does to people.
yeah. It feels like Holt and Bogart. They could either become Howard or they could end up getting their heads cut off next to a dirty
Right.
little pond in a
Mm.
dead ass Mexican village, which is
Yeah, man. Oh
crazy.
God.
That's a crazy. That's for 1948. That is pretty crazy, especially because he shot it to be even more graphic. Which is again,
Yeah.
Houston, you're a fucking nut job, and I love you, but like,
Oh God.
like
I
where,
would love to see the like non-Hays Code version of that scene, and like how fucking brutal they would go.
I would love to
It's
see it
like
too.
because like it's so the fact that it's Humphrey Bogart, it's maybe the height of his stardom, and he's not in the last 10 minutes of the movie. Spoiler alert for anybody listening.
Yeah, spoiler alert, 80
Uh,
years later.
I mean, that's crazy for a star. If he's the star,
Yeah,
like he's not in the last 10 minutes of the film. He's like his death is so unceremonious.
and especially for like at this time in Hollywood and with his career in particular, but like
Right.
those gangster movies were out of vogue at this point, kind of. So
Right.
like we can have gangster movies and Cagney's a big star in them, but he's got to die at the end because you got to have a moral code. Like
Mhm.
he got started doing shit like that as the supporting guy in those kind of movies,
Right.
and you do research on it. He was trying to not do those things, but Houston sold him on it, and he said it was like the best script he ever read. So he's like, "Yeah,
Sure.
I'll definitely play this unrepentantly disgusting, just vulgar cretin who's going to die 10 minutes before the movie ends because
Yeah.
this is just too good to pass up." And like you mentioned, this is neck deep in the Hays Code. Like this is
Mhm.
48, so they're filming it in 47 because Houston really took his time filming this movie to Jack Warner's absolute fucking anger.
Sure.
Nailed the budget up from what should have been an
I'm sorry,
already
Tom.
insane like 1.5.
I have
Yeah,
been trying not to jump in. I have been letting you guys roll, but if we're going to talk about Jack Warner's response to this movie, can I please drop a Jack Warner quote?
Yeah, of
sure.
course.
So Jack Warner was furious watching the dailies from this movie.
Yes, he was.
He hated how dirty Bogart looked. He hated how it wasn't
Yes.
coming together. His approach to Bogart was like you always hear those stories of when Disney was watching the dailies of the first Pirates of the Caribbean, and they're just like, "What the fuck is happening here?" But
Eh.
the best quote is that apparently there was so much footage coming in of the hunt for water that Jack Warner is quoted as saying, "The son of a bitch better find water soon or we'll go bankrupt." And I just wanted to make sure that was on the record. Continue, gentlemen. I will not interject further.
Well, I was just
I
gonna
mean,
like just the point I was making, like for a movie this dark in 48, that it was gonna have supposed to have like a $1.5 million budget, and then Houston just creeped it up into like 2.5 million. Some reports saying 3 million, and the fact that it even like it didn't do well when it came out, but like Jack Warner when it came together, he was like, "This is the best movie we ever made. This is unbelievable. We need to."
sure.
And it like kind of over time made its money back, but at the time it wasn't the biggest hit in the world because like imagine like with 3 years after World War II, and we're just watching and people are just like, I don't want to watch a 2-hour movie about just a bunch of dirty ass Americans just
Mhm.
torturing themselves to get gold that in the end they don't get. And one of them, our main star, the lovely Humphrey Bogart from Casablanca, gets his goddamn head cut off. Like that's like, there's a reason why Nightmare Alley didn't fucking succeed 2 months ago because
Yeah,
it's really goddamn dark and nobody wants to be wallowing in that shit sometimes.
it is that is a very interesting parallel you just drew, and I think it speaks a lot because Nightmare Alley was my favorite film of 2021. I thought that was like the film that kind of is one of those movies that I'm like, why isn't it popular that people won't accept that at any point you could become a geek?
Yeah.
like you are everybody, every single one of us is this close to becoming a Dobbs. Like we could like lose it all at any moment, and we could be like the ugliest versions of ourselves. And people don't like watching that in movies.
I'll
No, they
also
don't like watching
say
that movie.
I'll also say the other element of that parallel for both films is that in both cases of Sierra Madre and the new Nightmare Alley, it is very clear that the studio had no idea how to market the film.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
Nightmare Alley, I mean, I remember I texted Tom after I saw it in my crowded theater of 4 people and
Mhm.
saying, like, on the one hand, they did not market this well. On the other hand, I don't know how you market that movie because you kind of yeah, I don't know how to like they sold it to you like it's going to be all, carnival sideshow stuff when it's definitely not, but also if you start telling us what the movie actually is, folks can, start putting together the pieces. With Sierra Madre, Warner Brothers again did not know how to market this. That's why the poster to this movie is insane. The poster like shows the prostitute that walks by for 5 seconds so that it can convince you that this
Right.
is some and there's a man on the horse. They're trying to sell it to you that it's like a traditional Western. They
Yeah.
apparently
Yeah.
had Bogart. They only flashed this in the documentary, and I couldn't find the original newspaper. It had Bogart marketing a line of clothing that tied into the
Oh,
movie, like men's suits, calling them
interesting.
treasures. Like they had, and they emphasized
Huh.
treasure, like it's a treasure hunt.
Okay.
And it's so bizarre. Like they just did not know. And I think that's fair because Sierra Madre is a movie where you're like, how do you sell this to people? Like, what
It
is
isn't, yeah. It isn't quite a Western. It's not quite an action film, although it has elements of it. It's not like a noir, although it also has elements of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is kind of a hard define. Like it is a hard sell. I get it from a marketing standpoint. I get it.
it's
And and again,
yeah.
it is a dark movie.
Oh
It's
yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's just like Mike texted me before. It's like it's almost like watching like the 1948 version of Uncut Gems or something, where you
Well,
just the whole
that's
time you're just like,
that.
Yeah, Uncut Gems is another movie I was thinking about this time rewatching it. I was like, wow, yeah, you could like, and it's like it'd be really funny to hear the Max Steiner score from this movie over Uncut Gems.
I
And just like hear like the Adam Sandler like do so, like I'm gonna put $10,000 on this thing and then just bwah, bwah, na, 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 na.
I
yeah,
I said it to Tom because I was trying to explain, like, I couldn't figure out for the life of me when I was about to revisit this. Before I revisited it, like, why was it that I watched Maltese Falcon so many times as a kid? I watched Casablanca so many times as a kid. I watched all those Warner gangster movies as a kid. And I was like, I only ever watched Sierra Madre once as like a kid when I was
Mm,
watching these. And I was like, I wonder why that is. Did I not like it? This and that. And then watching it again for this reminded me why, which is I remember this movie as I must have been like 9 years old. This movie freaked me out. It was
sure.
I was so I remember being I was a kid, so I didn't understand the word anxious at that point, so I was just like it scared me.
Mm,
But I just remember because this movie is a film, and I used Uncut Gems as the analogy because much like Uncut Gems, this is a movie where they start out in a bad position and then it constantly gets worse.
mhm.
Like everything that would be the climax of another movie, right? Like a different film it basically like a different like a movie that's tense that I could watch. The Oxbow incident, right, is all about well, what do
Mm,
we do with these guys? This movie is the Oxbow incident in its first act, and then it keeps getting worse for them. That's what's
mhm.
so that's what I think freaked me out so much as a kid, and that's why I use the Uncut Gems analogy because Uncut Gems is another movie where it's not, oh, this guy's in trouble the whole time. It's, oh, hey, we're like halfway through. He made his money back. This guy's set. He's good. It's fine. And then he doubles down. And it's the same
Yeah.
way where, like, for the first chunk of this movie, you're like, are they going to find this gold? Are they going to,
Mhm.
and then the guy should, what are we going to do with the guy? And then you have the great, obviously the oft misquoted scene about badges happening and all of this, and it just keeps ramping up and ramping up so that what starts as like an adventure movie ends up feeling like a universal horror movie toward the end. You know,
Yeah,
the
I mean,
Oh,
he's like the Invisible Man by the end, just this ranting, raving maniac talking to himself. He's like literally incapable of executing Tim Holt, who's like right in front of him. He shoots him and just like barely does anything to him because he's just
mhm.
ranting, and raving. Oh, they're coming for my gold. Oh, they're coming for my gold. Blah, 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 blah." And until he's just got no other, until even he has to realize, oh, I'm dead when the bandits are surrounded. I was like, there's no way out of this for me. There is an Adam Sandler and Uncut Gems element to him because he keeps making the wrong decision, and every good decision that could possibly come his way, he immediately doesn't want to do it and kind of has to be talked into it, like the lotto ticket, or he's about to fucking kill Walter Houston because he thinks he's leading him nowhere, but Walter Houston's about to tell them, no, I found the gold. Relax, you fucking nut job. And
Right.
just the whole time he's doing the wrong thing. I mean, it's great. It's just, this is one of those movies, man, where it's just like everything about it is great. Every decision was the right one.
Everything about it's great. It's one of those things. It's like it's affected culturally. Like its DNA is in other movies,
Oh yeah.
and like the just like the from the misquotable lines, or like just the stake a fellow American to a meal. Just like all the
are
like
you referring to 8-Ball Bunny? Because I was going to bring up 8-Ball Bunny.
that's the cartoon, right?
So
That's the Warner.
yeah, they included that on the DVD, and I threw it
Mhm.
on because I wasn't sure, like, because I remembered 8-Ball Bunny just being a cartoon about Bugs Bunny and Playboy Penguin, who is one of the
Right.
finest Looney Tunes characters because his whole thing is he's a penguin in a top hat. We love it. And I had it on and I couldn't remember, like, what does this have to do with Sierra Madre? And then the running gag, the fact that it's not about the hunt for the gold, the fact that it's not the badges quote or anything, it's just that a running gag throughout this cartoon is that Bogart, a photorealistic Bogart, repeatedly shows up and does the line of, "Pardon me, sir, could you help a fellow American who's fallen on hard times?" And like the gag that they're kidnapped by people in the jungle and thrown into a pot. They're about to be eaten, and what scares them off? Something rustling in the bushes. It's Bogart showing up and asking for some money for have a hard time.
It is really funny. Those cartoons were like what 7, 8 minutes
Yeah,
long,
yeah,
and they are so good at comedic heightening in the way where like I remember I rewatched that you guys because that you can find that on you can watch that short on HBO Max, and you forget that Bogart's there when he comes back. It's like one of those
yeah.
things like, oh, it's a great callback. You forget that they and it's like 7 minutes. It's not long, so you shouldn't really forget. And it made me really think, it was like, it's a shame that the movies don't like that there's no studio system anywhere, that movies don't work
Yeah.
that way, that they don't like have cartoon, like there's no animation studio. I mean, now there is, like just with like Pixar and Disney and stuff, but like there's not like a like each like they don't make shorts before movies,
Yeah.
and that and in turn those shorts can't reference the
Well,
movies.
it's also like one of the things I talk about a lot, because I'm one thing I have to explain to people. I am a huge Disney history nut, and part of that, it's not because of just like, oh, I want to wear the ears and go to the theme parks, but they are the only studio that still has a very major studio that still has a very strong sense of brand identity and still references its history. And that wasn't always the
Mhm.
case. Like when we were growing up, like, Warner Brothers had the Warner store, and Warner Brothers made so much stuff about like we're so in on the magic of the movies and Warner Brothers history. And these discs we're talking about,
Yeah.
like you used to, when they put out a movie or a box set, particularly a film, they would not just give you the Treasure Sierra Madre. They loaded it with documentaries. They would do my favorite thing, which is Warner Night at the Movies, where Leonard Maltin would give
Yeah.
you, like you were describing, here's the newsreel that would have played before it. Here's the short.
That's what
Here's the
yeah.
live action.
I had when I was a kid, I had the Warner Brothers Gangster
Yep.
collection.
Yep. It's sitting right next
Was
to me. Yeah.
with all of and had all those, had the newsreels, the shorts. It was like, it really was a great feature. They're great little features to have on those on the special features for a DVD, because it's like it really puts you in that time frame of like going to the movies and seeing this film and what the program was like.
And it's something we talked about recently in terms of, we just did an episode on Harold Lloyd's The Freshman, and
Okay.
how that movie is referencing a lot of pop culture of that time that like we don't get now.
Sure,
that you would have to have been there to get. And I think that those Looney Tunes shorts really give you a sense of, you can kind of get lost in maybe the myth making around certain movies, where if you watch that Sierra Madre documentary, they kind of just go like, it won Oscars, but it wasn't a huge financial success. And it's easy for us to translate that now as nobody saw it. But that's not necessarily true, because it was well known enough that you could reference that scene and that line in a Looney Tunes cartoon and get a laugh out of the audience. You know, it was still present, and it was still a film that people knew, and a film that was a gem in the Warner Brothers crown, which I think is so interesting.
And like we've been talking about, it's one of those things, like it's just different than the movies that came out from Warner Brothers in that time period. It's different. It was like it's different in Bogart's career, and even like he was like like you were talking about earlier, Tom, of just like this was a darker role than he was trying to get away from. And I was just watching. I recently watched a movie he was in when he was younger, called Brother Orchid.
Okay.
Have you guys seen that or talked about that?
No.
Okay, it's him as the supporting cast, but it stars Edward G. Robinson, and it's a comedy. It's a pretty straightforward gangster comedy, like with EGR in the lead, and Edgar G. Robinson plays like a gangster. He tells his crew that he's gonna leave and go to Europe and like try to get classy and whatever. And he comes back a couple years later, and his gang has taken over the business. Humphrey Bogart, his former second in command, now head boss, is the head guy of his business, ices him out, and then tries to kill him. So Edward G. Robinson hides out in a monastery.
That's so. I just find that interesting, because I was thinking, when you said Edward G. Robinson gangster comedy, he weirdly has several of those. Because
he played to his strengths. He's there. It's very funny. It has like really funny scenes in it. It's a good movie, but like Humphrey Bogart plays the supporting, and he's a really bad guy. Like it's earlier in his career when he was mostly playing like the bastard, like the absolute shitty, the villain usually.
I haven't seen that. I've seen the one that he did the year 2 years prior, Slight Case of Murder, which is a different Edward G. Robinson comedy. The other Bogart role that I think is interesting, and it's just because I've been on a kick of this lately, and it ties it around to this. The Bogart one I always think of like early in Bogart's career, even before he's the bad guy. Oh no, it's around this time. A year before he makes that film you're talking about, Brother Orchid, he shows up as the playful best friend character in Dark Victory, the Betty Davis picture winner.
Right.
And his co-star in that, the other friend character, is, of course, Ronald Reagan.
Right.
Ronald Reagan, who was in consideration for the role that ultimately went to Tim Holt in The Treasure of the Sierra Madre.
Oh, wow.
There are so many almost Reagan roles out there.
You know what? As much as I hate to admit it, I think Reagan might have been good in this role.
I have to say, like, truly, and I've told this time I'm struggling with this a lot, in terms of actors, when we talk about like having a problematic fave, there are so many times where like Reagan shows up in something and I'm like, I mean, yeah, no, I get like you Iran-Contra was a nightmare and you just made things so much worse politically, but I really enjoy you in Newt Rockney. It's a conflict.
I mean, it is one of those weird things with Reagan, because his career is laughable, but it's also fascinating. But you look at, because I just watched the 1963 Killers.
Oh
the
yeah,
Yes,
he's
yeah,
great in
yeah.
that.
Well, that movie's to me was not as good as I wanted I love the 48 version of the with Burt Lancaster. That's a great movie. But this one with Lee Marvin and Clu Gulager, I was like, it's okay. It's a little too violent. And Reagan fucking slaps Angie Dickinson, and it's totally
Yep.
insane. And it's really jarring to see just him being like, "Give me my money," and it's just like, whoa. And then so to picture him in this role and just kind of his like, his kind of vacancy as a human being, of like just the way he would say things, his just delivery of lines as a person, just him being like, "I'd want to go to pick fruit, and I just can't wait to get my share of the gold so I can pick fruit."
I mean, I'll say this for Tim Holt, who, by the way, I cannot say his name without wanting to do the Arrested Development gag, the Steve Holt.
Ha,
But Tim Holt,
Tim Holt.
I feel for Tim Holt, because Tim Holt was a low budget, like B movie Western star, right? He's in that
Mhm.
model of your Giorgio. He was not. He never reached the heights of. He never reached the heights of maybe a Roy Rogers or a Gene Autry or anything like that. But he was
Right.
a B movie Western star, and
Yeah.
which I watched. He is exactly what you want. I watched his movie Thunder Mountain today. It's like a 1
I've been
hour.
meaning to
like,
check out his westerns because I just to be clear, I love Tim Holt in this movie. I think he's like a fantastic actor, and like his career is fascinating, as like you said, Mike, of like just being like a western guy. Like he was like in all these like B serial westerns, and his dad was also like a western star
who shows up in
of
this
that
film.
tradition. Yes, he's one of the I forget who he plays.
He's
but-
one of the guys in the Flophouse with Walter Houston, Jack Holt.
Right. Okay. I should have looked out for him. I was curious to see what he
But
looked like.
but yeah,
Tim Holt is a fascinating guy. He's like one of these actors who grew up of westerns in the 20s and 30s, watching his dad in them, and then like being like, I want to be that guy, and then became one of the best of those. But like you're right, not of a Gene Autry or Roy or Will Rogers level. But then he gets cast in The Magnificent Ambersons by Orson Welles, and playing arguably, like, compared to the roles he had been like playing, against type. Like he is a dandy, sheltered, possessive, spoiled rich boy, and he plays a guy who never looked like he did a day's work in his life very well. It's very surprising for someone whose literal job and ostensibly passion, as like reported by him, is to be like in these B westerns. They're not great. They're low budget. I just think that's fascinating. He's so good as an actor, like above the genre that he's known for.
Well, and then when he retired from acting, like not too long after this, getting stuck doing roles he didn't want to do, he became a rancher. He became a cowboy and owned ranches until the day he died. Also, don't want to burst the bubble here, but Reagan was actually supposed to be Houston's choice for the James Cody role, not Bob Curtin.
oh really?
Ah,
Oh wow.
Yes,
That's
which
ah,
that makes sense. I could see
that
that.
makes sense too. I honestly, I don't think that really changes anything either. Like this actor, Bruce Bennett, he does a lot. I like him, but
Yeah, he
I feel also
he does.
I think Reagan could do it
Oh,
too.
I
Well,
think
because
he'd be better in
Reagan would.
that.
Well, because Reagan would make you really question if this guy's full of shit or not,
Mhm.
because that.
Yeah. Oh no, Reagan would be a little bit more convinced there's an ulterior motive if it was Reagan as the cast.
Oh, yeah,
We should
because
also
Yeah.
single out.
Very funny.
Oh, sorry.
Well, no. Who should we single out? Are we going to talk about our favorite older man, our favorite older gentleman?
Actually, before I get to that, I want to make sure we really single out one of the undersung performances in this film, which is Alfonso Bedoya as
Oh, yes,
Holt.
I-
Oh, yeah.
Just
Is he gold? Hat?
yes. one
Okay.
of those, like, it's something when we did the Searchers last season, we talked about the guy who plays Scar and just how menacing he is. And there is something about, like, when Alfonso Bedoya shows up as Gold Hat and he's doing that whole, even when he's just trying to get the gun away from Bogart, right, in one of the early scenes, you're
Right.
watching Bedoya and at least for me, like, you just get this feeling of, like, I have never seen anyone like this before. Like, his look, his persona, everything, you're just like, this is a whole thing. This guy is
Yeah, he was
delivering.
really well cast. He's very real.
And that's all, thanks to Houston's just absolute insistence on filming in Mexico, because he wanted those
Yeah.
real lived-in faces and not just some guys from the Warner's lot that they throw some shoe polish on and say, I don't
Yeah.
know, try to do a Mexican accent. I don't know, do
Th-
something.
that's also like a really like breath of fresh air when you watch this movie, because so many movies from this period you can like you're like watching, it's like, oop, that's definitely an Italian actor in like a costume, a very offensive costume. And now it's like when you have this, it's like, wow, they actually filmed in Mexico. They cast actors. They cast people, whether they be actors or like, I think some of them were vaudeville performers, and everything is authentic, and it adds to the realness. Everything, it makes you, it's a better viewing experience.
Well, yeah, and I mean, you mentioned before this movie doesn't feel like anything else made at the time. It's because, I mean, one of the probably the biggest reason is that a lot of movies didn't film on location. I mean, some did,
Yeah.
but this was like one of the biggest ones to actually just like for the majority of the movie be an on location thing, which again made Jack Warner lose his goddamn fucking mind about the budget, but it added this gritty realism to it and bringing in these faces, Alfonso Bedoya was a Mexican actor. He's not some guy they just grabbed, on, like I said, off the Warner's lot. And all of the bandits were just a bunch of Mexicans from that village, and apparently
Yeah.
one or two of them were actual bandits, and were not too pleased with an actor playing a bandit, and
Oh wow.
bullied Alfonso Bedoya.
Damn.
So it's just all of these things. I mean, we do have to say, I mean, other than the little Mexican boy selling the lottery tickets being a young Robert
Oh
Blake.
wait, you're right. Damn, that is the thing. There is one.
Oh, yeah,
There's always one.
there's,
Ooh.
there's always one.
So
But
before we, sorry, just I want to make
Yeah.
sure before we talk Oscars and let David go, as you were hinting at, Tom, there's somebody else that we have to talk about, who fortunately for Tom and I, we get to talk about twice this season,
hell yeah.
because we also have Dodsworth this season, a movie that everybody's jumping at. No one knows Dodsworth. But we have to talk about the Oscar-winning performance by Walter Houston. Just want to make sure we
yes.
talk about Walter.
Unbelievable. I mean, John Huston saw his dad in this role. His dad didn't see himself in this role. He didn't want to be a supporting actor. He thought he was still a leading man.
Which is insane.
But
that's crazy.
It's called Warren Beatty syndrome. But
yeah, it's insane. I mean, but he was so good and so into the role, and then you have John just so into it, and then just John and Walter's relationship led to Humphrey Bogart saying, jokingly, one, Houston's bad enough, but two, a murder. It feels so modern, a performance. Like, I feel like anybody that's ever been to a bar or has been to like a family gathering where there's like older uncles that just like, there's that one older uncle that's always got stories.
He's the quintessential like I've seen things guy. Like he's the guy like, yeah, no, I've lived a life.
I've got a story. He's always laughing about ththings, and then when you actually think about the stories he's telling, you go, "Oh, that's an insane story you just told me. Why are you laughing
Yeah.
about this?" I mean, he had him play the role with his top teeth out, which he
Yeah.
didn't want to do because this was an era of acting where you needed to look good at all times. But it
Of
just,
course, yeah.
he says that the cackle and the little jig he does when they find the gold, and then at the end when they lose the gold, is he basically took that from his life when a Othello show he was doing in I think like 38 or 37 bombed so bad, and he realized opening night it was going to be a massive bomb, that he just had to laugh and dance about it because otherwise he would have fucking lost his mind. I mean, it's just, again, like,
he's the character that these two guys could become. Dobbs doesn't. Uh, Curtin probably is going to become, since he survives and has enough sense of humor about it to laugh about losing the gold. He's a guy that's seen shit. You get that in him. There's a, he's definitely like, oh yeah, no, I'll kill Cody. I mean, he's definitely got that in him.
That is that weird part of the movie when Cody comes into things. It's almost like when Daniel Plainview's brother comes into town.
Yep.
It's just like there's just this weird, like, whoa, what's this weird element? All of a sudden, it just layers things. It's just like makes things complicated. Suddenly, like, other characters start getting darker. Like, they're like Bob Curtin is considering murder, which is you wouldn't expect from that character.
He's good in a gunfight. They get into 2 gunfights in the movie. This is a guy
Yeah.
that's lived life, and there's so much dynamism to his character, and Walter Houston just expertly portrays it. And like I said, it just feels so modern that this character wouldn't be out of place in There Will Be Blood, like a movie you just mentioned. He feels just so, and it's perfect that he won the Oscar. I mean, he dies less than a year later, which is, a tragedy.
Oh, wow.
But I mean, this is feels like a perfect capper for a career that, I mean, this guy was just great, and this role is perfect. He nailed it. And Bogart didn't want to be second fiddle, but he knew coming into this movie he was going to get outshone by Walter Houston, and boy did he, in my opinion.
Now, do you guys before I'd I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the writer or the author at all.
B. Travers.
Yes, B. Travers.
Traven Travers? I don't remember offhand.
I think it's B. Traven.
B. Traven,
or B. Traven. And he, whom am I mistaken? Like, nobody knows who this guy is, right? Like, his identity's never really been revealed.
He's never been revealed. Nobody's ever met him. People think they met him because his, like, a quote unquote, like, I don't know, book agent or some guy who was always like, so I talked to B. Traven and he said, let's do this. And
I'm obsessed with this story. Yeah. This is like one of those crazy stories of, like, which is also why I think John Huston wanted to make this movie, because I totally understand if I was a filmmaker at that time, I read this book. This book's great. Who wrote it? B. Traven. What do you mean nobody knows who this guy is? What, like, that's the story. Now I have to find this guy. And John Huston, like, tries to look for this guy, and eventually, like, corresponds with, like you said, Tom, like his book agent or someone, and they arrange for a rendezvous in Mexico. John Huston goes to a hotel room and then wakes up at some point in the middle of the night or something. And this guy, this mysterious book agent, whose name escapes me, I can't remember, like some pseudonym. And he says, I represent B. Traven. And then they correspond. And a lot of people think that is actually who B. Traven was.
And that guy, is on, goes to set basically acting like the go-between for Traven. And everybody would
notes. And he's giving story notes.
Yeah, and everybody would just go up to him and be like, so are you B. Traven? Like, what's going on here? And he would always just be like, I don't know what you're talking about, and just, like, run away.
I am not B. Traven. I respond directly to B. Traven. B. Traven would like to emphasize the death more. Like, he would just completely go, just relay feedback. And I think that's a very funny story, and I want to see that movie in and of itself.
Yeah, that's like what is it, Shadow of the Vampire, about making Nosferatu, but like about this fucking guy just like not admitting he's clearly the guy who wrote this book that everyone's
it has this weird level of, like, Shadow of the Vampire and Being There, where it's just like, is this guy some sort of weird, like, idiot savant who's just like thinks he's fooling everybody?
Well, at the same time, you on our last episode we did together, you compare on Maltese Falcon, you compared John Huston to Paul Thomas Anderson, and another thing they have in common is, I'm sure a part of Huston wanted to adapt this book so that he could be one of the only people to see Traven's face, the same way that, when PTA actually got cleared to do Inherent Vice, he was like, I get to see Pynchon's face now. I get to see it. I
That's I definitely think that's and Paul Thomas Anderson is exactly the type of hipster director who wishes that he was a John
oh
Huston
yeah.
like type that like went to Mexico and fought in like or like went to Spain and fought in the Spanish Civil War or whatever and like just lived that type of life and which is like I forgot what like I was listening to some podcasts and talking about like generationally filmmakers move in that type of rhythm where you have like guys from John Huston's era who lived very this is a generation of guys who went to war and had less conveniences in life that like they got to live rougher existences and then you have later like the Spielbergs who are educated in movies and then you have the Tarantinos and the Andersons who are educated in even more movies. So it's just like a little bit more like people making movies about life and then making movies about people who made movies about life and then so on and so forth.
Before we let you go, I do just want to make sure we always wrap up talking about the Oscars, and this is a significant year.
Oh, yeah.
Treasure of the Sierra Madre was nominated for Best Picture alongside Johnny Belinda, The Red Shoes, The Snake Pit, and the winner, Laurence Olivier's Hamlet.
Wow, that's a good year.
It was nominated for Best Director, which it won. Walter Huston was nominated for Best Supporting Actor, which he won. And it was nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay, which it also won. So it won 3 Oscars. But here's a little trivia fact for you. John Huston actually directed 2 performers into Oscar-winning roles that year. Because Claire Trevor wins Best Supporting Actress for Key Largo at this same ceremony.
Oh, they came out the same year?
At least the same Oscar eligibility season. Yeah, this is still early on.
So, wow, so Bogart was doing back-to-back Key Largo. What did he shoot first?
I believe Madre first. I think Key Largo comes along later,
Okay.
but I'm not 100% certain on that. What I do know is Bogart was in Sierra Madre and Key Largo and got nominated for neither. Obviously, Olivier wins Best Actor for Hamlet that year.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing because, obviously now you talk to a lot of people and they'll say, well, Sierra Madre over Hamlet. I think part of the reason Hamlet wins, part of it is obviously, the reception to Madre, and the time of war. But I think part of it too is, don't forget that previously he had done Henry V, which was this
Right.
massive achievement that loses to Best Years of Our Lives. And the Hamlet win does a little bit feel like a makeup for... Like, a little bit like when Return of the King wins, and it's like, yeah, but this is really for all you're doing. This same way, like, Hamlet winning is like, this is for all the Shakespeares. Like, this is for Richard III and Henry V.
Or like, or DiCaprio winning Best Actor for The Revenant and being like, you probably should have won this earlier for something else. But, like, you're not going to get another one as you get older, so we're just going to give it to you now.
But yes, like you said, David, very good year. Obviously, we all know The Red Shoes and Hamlet. I watched...
I mean, imagine going like leaving the theater of Sierra Madre being like, wow, that's great. I got another 4 hours to kill. I'm going to go, I have 15 more cents. I'm going to pay and see Red Shoes.
Or...
and then be like, wow, like from black and white to stunning Technicolor.
And then like Johnny Belinda, which I watched recently, I was telling Tom about, is a movie that like for the first half you think, I don't want to, give too much away, but for the first half you think it's like, oh, this is some quaint Oscar bait thing about, local doctor teaches a mute girl sign language. And then the second half is like, well, the mute girl is raped by her sister's husband and she's got a baby and the town blames the doctor. And you're like, holy shit, this is dark.
Wow.
Like it's...
I didn't know that. I haven't seen
Johnny Belinda and Snake Pit are both like real dark. So
Snake Pit's great. That is a great year for movies.
The only other last bit of Oscar trivia I want to throw out that I thought was fascinating from this year is that one of the nominees for Best Original Song is the Woody Woodpecker song. It is the only time that an animated short receives a nomination outside of its category. It receives a nomination for Best Original Song for the Woody Woodpecker song. I thought that was a fascinating...
That's fascinating because I can't recall what that sounds like off the top of my head. It just does. Woody Woodpecker, as beloved as he is, no disrespect to Woody fans, but like He's not iconic.
He's faded a lot unless you go to South America, where apparently Woody Woodpecker is still immensely popular.
So that's a fascinating study. There's a lot of bird characters, animated bird characters that are very popular in South America. I'm not sure.
No, but it is interesting, like David points out, like, because then you watch like Three Caballeros or Saludos Amigos, and they throw in an obnoxious woodpecker character, which seems
Right.
like them taking a jab at Walter Lantz, who created Woody Woodpecker, but also kind of stole Oswald away from Disney to begin with. So it's a weird, complicated saga of cartoon birds.
Interesting.
Well, how
yeah.
about this before we say goodbye to David? One last Oscar trivia that John Huston's the only filmmaker to direct a parent and a child to an acting award at the Oscars.
Right? Yeah.
Because
wait, which of his kids did he direct?
Angelica Houston in Prizzy's Honor won Best Supporting Actress.
Prizzy's Honor.
Yeah.
Gosh, that's another thing. John Huston has a Hitchcock level filmography.
Oh yeah.
Like that guy made like what 35 movies or something. Like it's insane.
Well, I mean, it's like he went from 1941 in The Maltese Falcon, and his last movie's 1987, The Dead.
Yeah,
and he was born in
that's nuts.
He was born in 1906. Like he lived a life.
Like the only other person I think that maybe has a longer filmography is Eastwood, who's another one of those types of guys.
The thing you said about The Dead, Tom, throws me just thinking about the fact that John Huston directed a James Joyce adaptation in the 80s. Meanwhile, John Huston was alive while James Joyce was alive.
yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like a lot of he directed Wise Blood in 1979, and like I think he lived before. He's older than the author that wrote the book.
Truly, like John Huston may well have been reading the early strips of Annie, and also directed Annie.
That's like, yeah. I mean, I don't know how many other directors have that type of longevity, and he also was able to have an acting career on the side, which is insane.
Oh yeah, the guy was unbelievable. We are very lucky to have him, and we are very lucky to have many of his movies in the film registry. And I also have to say I'm very thankful for watching Five Came Back on Netflix, and when they go through all of the mental trauma that all those directors went through from going to World War II, and then they get to John Huston and basically go, yeah, he stayed the same.
I mean, like, one more little thing in connection between Huston and Anderson again. I also love that Five Came Back documentary, and one of the movies that Huston made when he was making those propaganda war films was Let There Be Light.
Yes.
Was which is a series of interviews at an army medical hospital talking to soldiers about what it wasn't called this, but it's about PTSD. And it's talking to soldiers about their experiences with battle and their I think they call it mental fatigue. Like just the stress of being in war and like what it does to you. Like what like hundreds of days of combat can have as an effect on the mind. And Paul Thomas Anderson pretty much used most of the scenes from that as the basis for the beginning of The Master.
Yep. And we will get to cover Let There Be Light in 20 seasons.
Oh.
So we've got a ways to go. Got in the National Film Registry in 2010. So
wow.
We've got a while. David, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you coming back. I really appreciate bringing all your film knowledge.
Thank you so much, guys. This was a blast.
Do you have anything you want to plug on the way out? Any social media, upcoming stuff, anything?
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram at Bluvbot and on Twitter at Bluvband. Be on the lookout for a show called Jigsaw that's coming to Netflix that I make a little appearance in. And then Kip Jones in Space, a podcast about a 1930s detective stuck in the future.
Well, thank you, David. Thank you so much for joining us. And everybody else, stick around because we'll be right back with our picks for the National Film Registry.
The National Film Registry isn't some fixed object, frozen in time. It's always growing, adding new titles every year. These annual selections are made by the National Film Preservation Board, with members like Martin Scorsese, Alfred Woodard, and Leonard Maltin, and representatives from organizations like the Academy, the DGA, and the AFI coming together to debate and decide. But they don't just pull titles out of thin air. They pull from the public, people like you and us, who can submit their nominations for the registry in a form on the Library of Congress's website. What we do, at the end of each episode, is have Mike and Tom pick films not yet in the registry that they feel should be, inspired by that day's topic. At the end of each season, those films will be formally submitted to the National Film Registry for consideration, on behalf of your missing out. Here are today's picks.
So, I was thinking about it, and obviously the crux of Treasure of the Sierra Madre is greed, and the unique kind of greed inherent to American capitalism. And then on top of that, I was thinking about the fact that this doesn't just revolve around greed, it revolves around a trio of different characters, right? And you have Dobbs, who is pretty much a bastard from the start, but because he puts up the stake, because he's got the right idea, everyone's willing to follow him, even though he ultimately brings about ruin. You have the sort of bright-eyed young optimist in Tim Holt's character, and then you have kind of the elder statesman, who is a smaller role but a much more memorable performance, really pops. And I started thinking about how that very same dynamic and this trio corrupted by greed exists again in a much more recent film examining a much different pursuit and pursuit of wealth. I kept thinking of David Fincher's The Social Network. In that film, you have Jesse Eisenberg's Mark Zuckerberg is the Humphrey Bogart character, is the guy who, from the start, we know is just a piece of shit. But, you know, he ultimately surrounds himself with these people, leads them on this journey, and leads them all to misery. Andrew Garfield's Eduardo Severin is kind of the Tim Holt of this group, the one that you kind of root for a bit, but is still corrupted to some degree or another. And of course, Timberlake's Sean Parker is, in a way, you know, the same kind of elder statesman that Walter Houston's character is, kind of coming in and trying to offer some wisdom and trying to be like, I've been through this before, and it ultimately goes awry. I mean, The Social Network is easily one of the best films of this new century that we're in, arguably this new millennium that we're in. It is a film that has gotten much more potent and resonant in its day, much like Treasure of the Sierra Madre. It was heavily favored at the Oscars, but because it was so dark and grim, lost to a stuffy film about royalty. But I think, you know, it's certainly something that's gotten, you know, from the score to the performances. This is something that has always deserved to be in the registry, and I think is something that all of us have thought at various points should be in. So, you know, it's no surprise it just was a matter of which episode we mentioned it at the end of. But, you know, its score, its script, everything about it is just perfect and has become so much more relevant now. I remember when it came out, one of our professors in college went, yeah, I don't know. That doesn't deserve any awards because in 10 years, who's going to care about Facebook? And here we are 12 years later, and oh my God, you know, it's unsettlingly relevant. So I truly believe The Social Network, one of the defining films of our time, David Fincher's The Social Network, absolutely should be in the National Film Registry.
So for my pick, I'm going to go with one that feels like a direct descendant of this movie. It takes more of a thriller form and it's a very compact, tight movie. It's not a epic, but it's just as epic in its filmmaking, and it is just so effective, and it's just as richly realized and realistic and gritty, and just the filming locations were just insane, and the filming process was even crazier. I mentioned it before. I think it's Sorcerer should be in the film registry. It's, I mean, arguably Friedkin's best movie. It might even be. It might be better than Exorcist. Ask me any day, and the answer might change. But it's an amazing movie. It's a nail biter. It's kind of a perfect movie. It definitely feels very much attuned with Treasure of the Sierra Madre in theme and in character. It's a much more dour movie, but I think it's just as equally riveting and expertly executed. Yeah, I think Sorcerer is a pretty good companion to this movie, and I think if we're gonna put anything up that's close to Treasure of the Sierra Madre, I think this is probably the closest you're gonna get. So, Sorcerer. No sorcerers are in it.
Let's all go to the lobby, lobby, lobby.
Thank you again to David Bluvband for joining us. Next week, it's All Quiet on the Western Front with Action for Everyone co-host and returning guest Vice Victus. Don't forget to follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you again next time. Here on You're Missing Out.
They honor movies of historical, cultural, or aesthetic importance on the National Film Registry.